with the second episode of the Gaily Podcast. I'm your host, Robin Dorner.
And I'm your co-host, Alex Myers.
This week, we're talking to Scott Hamilton. Being the executive director of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, Scott knows a little something about the importance of elections. And yes, you guessed it, we're talking about our recent primary and the November elections with him today. So without further ado, let's jump right into it.
So for those who don't know you, can you give us an elevator pitch about what you do for a living?
Sure. I am the executive director of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, which means I'm responsible for all staff efforts of the party and supporting candidates throughout the state as well as elected officials in the party. So it's an exciting, very exciting job. And I love the work. It's very challenging, but I'm no stranger to challenging tasks, and that's where I thrive the most.
And you must have definitely been pretty busy with the recent Democratic primaries. Are you surprised by any of the results?
Not terribly. Obviously, the biggest surprise was the 802 question, the fact that it only passed by 1 percentage point. And, you know, there was a lot of talk in the press about how rural Oklahomans voted against their own best interests. But the piece of that equation that was left out is those are the folks who were hit hardest with the negative ads, ads that were full of lies, things like, do you really want Pelosi in charge of your health care, and that kind of thing. So they didn't vote against their own best interest. I think if anything, they thought they were doing the right thing. I'm just grateful that it passed. I'm also grateful for the turnout. We have been pushing vote by mail all year, but certainly at the start of COVID, we encouraged everyone to get their absentee ballots. And the number of people that voted that way, it was very encouraging. A lot of first-time voters were able to vote that way this time.
And why do you think voting by mail has been such a controversial issue during this election cycle?
It's interesting. It's an interesting question. It's only controversial for the administration for some reason. The president, the vice president, they vote by mail, and yet they don't think that we are responsible enough to do that. The incident of voter fraud, all of the research shows that it's no greater with absentee voting than it is with in-person voting. It's minuscule. The Republican Party has a history of making voting a challenge for people. In Oklahoma, had it not been for one provision, people still would have had to get their absentee ballots notarized, which defeats the purpose of being able to vote remotely from home where you feel safe. This time they were able to do so with a photocopy of an ID. But the Oklahoma Democratic Party is suing the state election board, saying that this is nothing more than voter interference. And it really does pose a barrier to people who should be able to vote without the necessity of a notary. And Oklahoma law says that notaries can only notarize 20 ballots per election.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so you see how it's just one roadblock after another. So Alex, to address your question head on, I don't think it is controversial so much as it is just another scare tactic of this administration.
And going on some of the key Democratic players in Oklahoma, what are some key issues that you think they'll be bringing up in their campaigns that are going up until November?
I think that some of the things that affect Oklahomans the most right now are economic issues, and tied to that, of course, is employment or unemployment, a living wage. Now, that's something that we're not going to have in Oklahoma right away. I'm proud to say that the party staff, everyone who is on our staff, is paid a living wage. And honestly, that's not an easy thing to do in the nonprofit world, and especially when you're such a minority in Oklahoma. But it's important. That's something that's going to be addressed a lot. Also, the quality of education in Oklahoma. People are recognizing that it's fraught with challenges, that we still don't pay our teachers nearly enough. And so those are issues that are really going to climb to the top of the talking list, I believe.
And in general, why do you think there's not a livable minimum wage in Oklahoma?
Greed, in a word, it's greed. When you have someone like the Green family who can build a 30,000 square foot home off of the backs of people who are making minimum wage, there's no reason for that kind of disparity. But it's that whole adage, I got mine, now you get yours however you can. And unfortunately, it's to make anything less than a living wage, which is considered $15 an hour. It would be very, very hard to make it as an individual in Oklahoma, forgetting what it would be like to have a family trying to live on that amount of money. It would be just devastating every month, I would think, trying to figure out which bills to pay and how you're going to do that, and forgetting things like what happens when the hot water tank goes out. Those are big issues that happen to all of us, but if it's replace the hot water tank or put food on the table, those are hard decisions to make. And again, if we look at the income disparity, it's amazing the wealth that exists in Oklahoma, and it's also amazing the poverty that exists here. And it's that kind of disparity. Back to 802 for a moment, if I may. The people who voted against that in the highest numbers were wealthy suburbanites. They voted against it. So they have great health care and easy access to health care, but they don't want other people to have it. And I hear so much about the Oklahoma standard, and I'm not here to bash Oklahoma. I grew up here. But the Oklahoma standard is a bit of a myth. It's not as embracing as we would like to think that it is. And it's time we knock out some of those old myths, the same way people are knocking down statues of Confederate soldiers. It's time for us to just pull everything apart and not try to mend things, but really to start over in some aspects. And nothing could be truer than that being said of politics.
Mm-hmm. You said there's also a lot of wealth and poverty in Oklahoma, but going to the wealth and families like the Greens, how do they influence politics in Oklahoma?
Greatly, because their money speaks volumes. They can afford to fund any issue that they want to with a great amount of money. They're limited, as everyone else is, with how much individually they can contribute to a candidate. But in terms of issues or contributing to super PACs or creating their own super PAC, it's wide open. And so they have a great deal of influence, not just at the national level, but at the Capitol. Probably more so at the Capitol, because it's right here. And what I think that a lot of Oklahomans don't understand is how little their voices are heard. And as a result, people just tend to back off and say, it's out of my control. Well, what we're seeing now is, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, things are starting to change as a result of that, because voices are being heard, they're being amplified, the message is strong, it's clear, and that's what I encourage people to do. That's what I've always encouraged people in the LGBTQ plus community to do, is you've got to speak up. Now, I'm not talking about someone who's closeted, because that's a very private decision, and I would not want to jeopardize anyone's livelihood or their life, certainly. But if you're out and you have the luxury of friends and community, uh, then you owe it to the rest of the community, and certainly to yourself, to speak up on political issues. And if we could get all of the progressive folks in Oklahoma um, to all come together and vote one way, there is zero limit to what we could do. But unfortunately, that has yet to happen. I'm proud to say, though, the number of gay people that I've seen working with Black Lives Matter, who've been attending the rallies and marches, it has made my heart so happy. I was in Tulsa during 45's circus, and was there for Juneteenth. And the number of white and brown and Black people all coming together to celebrate Juneteenth was something that would have been unheard of when I was in school. So I am seeing some progress, and while it's been slow in many areas, Robin, you can certainly attest to this. We've seen greater positive movement in terms of LGBTQ rights in the last 10 years than we had in the rest of my lifetime put together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you have been there, not just covering it as a journalist, but being a part of the movement itself. And so I do see a ramping up. And of course, where anytime there's positive movement, there's going to be opposition. We're seeing that again with the administration stripping trans folks of rights, healthcare particularly, looking to make a change and not allowing openly LGBTQ people to serve in the military again. So there is pushback. However, I believe that in the end, good wins, and that's not a Pollyanna-ish view so much as it is one that's being borne out today. When I see communities who are not just angry at police, but want to figure out a way how to be supportive of police while they want the police to be supportive and appreciative and respectful of their community. That's dialogue. That's open dialogue. And as Oklahomans, we're not good with that. And I think it goes back to the way the state was born. They opened the gate, and here came everyone to establish their own little territory. And in many ways, we're still very territorial. But again, I see that as changing. I see more open dialogue. And I think it's up to those of us who have a hard time shutting up. And I'm speaking only for myself here. But we have to encourage other people to be involved in decisions that matter. I've heard people say, well, I don't have kids, so I really don't care about a school board election. Well, you should care, because those kids are going to be the ones who are coming to look for a job from you, or who are going to be either fixing your heart or fixing your car or whatever the case may be. But you need to have an investment in those children right now. And the best way to do that is to figure out the best people to serve on a local school board or a local city council or the mayor of a small town. These are all important issues that we all need to own and be a part of.
So my question to that would be, you've mentioned issues like Black Lives Matter, income inequality, education reform. How specifically will the Democratic Party of Oklahoma help with these issues?
Well, for one thing, we're raising the dialogue. We are standing in solidarity with groups. We had a press conference last week talking about the district attorney here in Oklahoma County, David Prater, and how he charged a whole bunch of young African American people with some pretty substantial charges, up to and including terrorism, and set their bail at $1 million. Now, honestly, if you set my bail at $50,000, I'm going to have to keep my butt in jail because I can't afford to get out. So nobody can afford to get out on $1 million bail. The charges were horrifying when you looked at them, and the degree to which bail was set for these young people. At about the same time, there was a gay man in Edmond who was beaten unconscious by a couple as they screamed anti-gay slurs at him. The man literally was beaten unconscious. The couple was cited for misdemeanor assault and sent home. So while they're home laughing about all of that, we've got a whole lot of Black kids who are sitting in county jail right now. And we called him out on that, which is very unusual because David Prater is a Democrat. But I believe, and the party believes, that where there is injustice, no matter who it is that's doing it, we have a responsibility of speaking out against it. And so that's one of the ways, Alex, that we are helping to raise consciousness about some of the important issues of our time.
And are you certain that bringing awareness and having dialogue will necessarily produce results?
I'm sorry, repeat the question?
Does raising awareness about these issues that you mentioned, will that still change the matter? Will that change the results?
Yeah, provided that in our messaging, we include, you've got to vote. And I mean, Robin, you were never in the Cimarron Alliance Equality Center when you didn't see a stack of voter registration cards.
Absolutely.
And that is a strong driving force for me. But Alex, that's a very good question, because if all we do is raise dialogue and get people more aware, but we don't encourage them to vote, then all we've done is just had a conversation, and it can't stop with a conversation.
And that's
because the side will get the conversation going and sway them the other way, is what I've seen.
Yep.
And I guess, I mean, we can all have this conversation as I assume we're all registered Democrats. The man you brought up, the district attorney, is also a registered Democrat. And I feel like in our party, we have this divide between more middle moderate Democrats and progressives. How do we go about reconciling the difference between that and within our own party?
That's a tough one to manage, I'll be honest with you, because people who are more progressive often tend to think that the party isn't progressive enough, and people who are more conservative Democrats tend to think that the party is way too progressive. So what we have to do is we've got to walk with a balance of those issues, and help to identify those areas that we have in common. A lot of times the more conservative Democrats, those are issues around financial responsibility. And that's something that even progressive folks can agree that we have to be fiscally responsible in order to provide health care for all people, good education, safe streets. But honestly, it is a tough line to walk, because if you're one extreme or the other, it can be polarizing, and that's what we don't need. We don't need that kind of a division in the state party. One of the things that I have observed as a gay man is that too often in minority groups, we tend to segregate within our own groups. We tend to square off with each other. And it's more of a microcosm of I've got mine, now you go get yours. Which the only thing I can attribute that to is that some of us have been oppressed for so long. It's not unlike being in an abusive relationship. The abused becomes the abuser. And I think that all of us carry some trauma to some degree, collectively. Maybe you didn't go to a church growing up that bashed gay people every week, but someone in your homeroom did. And you got to hear this over and over and over. So even if you came from a supportive family, there was a lot of outside interference in your life. And so that creates a sense of being less than. And so when you're in a position to be more than or feel like you're more than, then I think that sometimes we take advantage of that. So as with all groups, Alex, we have to try to find that commonality, the things that we can agree on and work on those issues. Mm-hmm. It takes everyone pulling the same direction.
But where do you find commonality in issues where Black Lives Matter protesters are being imprisoned with $1 million bails?
Oh, there is no commonality there. That is just that is egregious in handling justice. That's why criminal justice reform is so critical in Oklahoma. And I've heard people say that, well, that doesn't impact my family. Well, it sure might tomorrow. We don't know what's coming our way. And the absurdity of imprisoning more women than any place in the world, that's crazy. The number of people that we have incarcerated here is so high, particularly among minority communities, that it's just destroying generation after generation. And so, yeah, that's, to me, that's something that's not a left or right issue. It's a matter of right and wrong.
I completely agree. And going back to just the history of the Democratic Party in Oklahoma, I was just looking at the amount of Democrats in Oklahoma when I was born in '96, and we nearly doubled the amount of registered Republicans. That has flipped since. And I was wondering, besides maybe party realignment, why do you think that happened in Oklahoma?
I'm sorry, I just can't get over the fact that you were born in '96. You feel old.
No, I've gotten that a lot, so it's all good.
No, Oklahoma had a very, very long history of Democrats ruling the Capitol, living in the governor's mansion, both houses in the legislature. And then that started to change. And when it did, it was a radical change. And the Republicans have been in control now for a long time. And with the number of people that are registering to vote, Democrats are gaining, by the way, in terms of new registrations. And I think the more that the president speaks, the more people they may not change their party affiliation, but at least they're going to be open to some different ideas. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I don't hear from someone says, do you have any Biden or Republican for Biden signs so I can put in my yard?
Oh, wow.
Or people say, I've had it, I'm changing my party affiliation to Democrat. We also have a growing number of independents in Oklahoma, which I love that, because those are folks who may not ascribe to the ideals of one party or the other, but are open to listening and tend to be more progressive than, than folks on the other side would be. So yeah, it's cyclical, Alex. And the pendulum will swing back, and it'll be a Capitol full of Democrats again, hopefully sooner rather than later. But it's still going to take us a little time.
Yeah, because I was looking at the election results. The people who voted in this past primaries, Republican, there were 100,000 more Republican voters than Democrat voters. And when you have elections with, Inhofe and Broyles, you have to think, how will that, discrepancy influence the elections? But I guess you kind of answered it right there with saying that people are still on the fence with what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, Inhofe he's been such a fixture for so long, but I have to believe that a lot of folks in Oklahoma are just tired of him. They're tired of his same old, tired of his rhetoric that never moves forward. And pardon me, and here he has a challenger who's bright, who's articulate, who has good ideas that reflect the needs of Oklahomans. And I think that people are giving her a fair listen. Similarly, if you look at what happened in the last primary in central Oklahoma for Congress, every Republican that set out to challenge Congresswoman Horn, their commercials were nothing but butt kissing. I mean, that's all it was, up to Trump. And
yep.
if that's all you've got to run on, then you're pretty transparent. You don't have a foot in reality, especially as we're starting to see some of his loyalists start to drift away, and that's why Congresswoman Horn has gotten a lot of flack from some Democrats because she has been conservative in some of her votes. But she is trying to her best, I believe, to vote in the interest of everyone in her district, and that includes a big chunk of Republicans. This is the most highly contested congressional race in the country. Lots and lots of dark money are going to go into fighting her for this position. The DNC has been very helpful to her campaign, and I'm grateful for that because the resources that are going to be coming from the other side, we haven't seen anything like that in probably ever with what they're about to launch.
Wow.
Do you think there's going to be smear campaigns against Broyles?
Oh, of course, there will be, and that's just the nature of where politics is now. It's really dirty.
Can you name a Republican that you like? I always like to challenge people on the other side to name someone else.
My mom. I love my mom. Hate talking politics with her. Won't do that. And part of it is, I think, in fun, but part of it is seriousness. When I have family members that come to Thanksgiving dinner with NRA hats and MAGA shirts, it's like, yeah, thank you. I can't believe we were born in the same house. But yeah, that's right now. That's probably the only one that comes to mind, Alex.
Yeah, that's very understandable. But now I want to transition to you and your story. So you were born and raised in Oklahoma, and then you went to OU's journalism school, and then you moved to New York City. As a gay man in the 1980s, what was the culture shock like?
It wasn't. I honestly, when I left Oklahoma, and that was at the height of the oil bust. So it was a pretty desolate landscape here in terms of finding work. I knew one person in New York, a friend that I had gone to school with. And then she moved to New York to go to Columbia for grad school. And she said, why don't you come to New York and stay a couple of weeks and see what you think? And I agreed to go, but not for 2 weeks. When I got there, it felt like home right away. And in short order, it became home. I never thought I would leave New York, ever. My husband he grew up in Queens and lived there all of his life except when he was in the service. And for a long time, he had said, let's look for something in a warmer climate. I was always saying, yeah, well, maybe later. But eventually, he was pretty convincing, and he had been very supportive of my career. And so we started looking in the South, and I said, really anywhere but Oklahoma. I'm interested in going back to Oklahoma. And never say never, because I was offered an opportunity to come back to Oklahoma to do LGBT equality work. And I could not say no to that because I saw the great need. And that turned into an incredible opportunity for me to meet so many people, to engage with a great diversity of people. And I loved every minute of my time doing that. That certainly is not over, because in this position, there are a lot of issues affecting immediately our community, and so I still get to deal with those. But the people that call, and they sometimes not here in the office, but call me personally, sometimes they're looking for an attorney or a gay-friendly doctor, or they want to talk about their kid who came out as transgender. I got a call from a minister in Oklahoma City, and he said, I'm on the phone with a mother from Durant, and her child is transgender, and she doesn't know what to do with it. Can you help her? And those are all things that I find great joy in, because people trust me to help them, and it gives me an opportunity to hopefully touch someone in a positive way. But some of the things that we were able to accomplish were terribly exciting. My debate with Sally Kern will always be a highlight of my career.
It was wonderful. You really, really prevailed in that conversation. I was thinking about that the other day.
I loved that, and it's very similar, honestly, Alex, to the work that I'm doing here. Because at the end of the day, I can lay my head on the pillow and feel good about what I've done, because it's something that I've done or said, some interaction that I've had has made life a little better for someone else. And there's no money, there's no price tag that you can put on that. I've been in the nonprofit sector for most of my career, and that's why I'll probably be able to retire when I'm about 103. But it's not about the money. It's about an opportunity to do some good, and no matter how small it is, and some days I think it's very, very small. But my goal every day is to make life a little better for someone, and that was true at Cimarron, and it's certainly true here.
Mm-hmm. Did you always see yourself working in the nonprofit sector? Because, looking at your life, you went from going to a copywriter to the director of planning at the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. It just seems like such a diverse background. How's that path work?
Everything that I've done has had a communications component to it. Certainly this job. The American Institute of Chemical Engineers actually is a nonprofit, and I had a great opportunity there because I had a really large staff. and a really nice marketing budget. And so we got to do a lot of fun things. And it was some superb training for me because it was more of a corporate style of business than I guess your typical nonprofit. And then I went from there to SAGE, with the Services and Advocacy
Yeah.
for older gay folks. And man, that was a heady experience getting to talk to some people who really paved the way. At that time, Edie Windsor was on the board of SAGE, and I talked to her just about every day. And then to see what a pioneer she was and the legacy that she left is pretty astounding. I didn't set out with the notion of spending my career in nonprofit, but again, it's mission driven and as opposed to bottom line driven, and that appeals to me. It work in church, work volunteering with other nonprofits. I love the sector. I love everything about it except the pay. But it's a trade-off, and it's what I happily do.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I don't consider myself that knowledgeable in LGBT senior rights. I know there's an aging crisis going on, and there's not going to be enough healthcare staff to accommodate the increasing amount of boomers who are 65 and older. What separates the struggles from an LGBT senior from a heterosexual senior?
A lot of it depends on where you live. If you live in a big city, the needs are very different. For one thing, in a bigger city, you can have your groceries delivered and your dry cleaning delivered, your laundry picked up, your medications delivered. That's changing now, so that's more readily available across the country. One of the biggest changes, or one of the biggest differences is as we age in a community, say Oklahoma City, where we get in our car to drive 2 blocks to the 7-Eleven. And because we don't have great mass transit, and everyone is tied to their car. But think about what happens when you lose the ability to drive. You are completely isolated from your friends. Your neighborhood is probably not your community. There are people that you wave to, or people you may have a good relationship with, but it's not the same as the community that you have enjoyed for most of your life. And so we collectively are going to have to figure out a way to keep older folks engaged and not allow them to age in isolation. Another thing, and this is tragic. This is a big difference between gay and straight folks as we age. The stories that I have heard and the statistics that I've read about older people, particularly gay men, who literally have to go back into the closet in their senior years because they're terrified of being harmed by a home health care person. They have a built-in distrust of the medical community because of the way that they have been treated in the past. I've heard people that have gotten rid of every photograph of a former lover, gotten rid of their porn collection, gotten rid of their pride flags, anything that shows that they're a gay man, because they're simply afraid of being hurt or killed by someone in their own home just because they're gay. And that's tragic, because that takes away, it takes something away from you that you worked hard to overcome in the first place, to come out, a big step of bravery. And then to have to take that step back for your own self-preservation That's a big difference, because straight people don't have to do that.
Did you ever hear stories from seniors who got abused by home health aides because they were gay? And like, are there like statistics that show the likelihood of seniors being abused if they're LGBT?
Yeah, actually, currently the fear is greater than the reality. It's not a real commonplace thing.
Do you think it's generational, kind of like the fact that, elder LGBT people, they grew up during a time where, it was criminalized to be gay, while my generation, when we get older, we don't have as much of a distrust with, the medical field?
Right, but you also have to consider the person that's coming into your home. What is that person's background? Do they share your values? Do they share your ideals? Just because you're of similar age does not mean that you think similarly. And so it is generational to a point, but we wouldn't see gay people being beaten up in the street. We wouldn't see trans people being killed just because they're a trans person. And these are all being done by people of a similar age.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You don't see an old woman walk up and shoot a young gay man.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. On just another note of LGBT rights, I saw a video in 2013 of you being interviewed by KOCO. I think it was about DOMA, and you said that you and your husband had to go to Connecticut to get married. What was it like being married in one state and almost having it not recognized in your home state?
Well, it wasn't recognized. It wasn't. At that time, we lived in New York, and we had a little weekend place in Connecticut. But we were married when we were in Connecticut, but when we crossed back into New York, we weren't married. And certainly when we moved to Oklahoma, we were not married. And one of the things that I said, and I'm so glad that prophecy was wrong, it was about that time that I said, marriage equality to Oklahoma, but it will be the last state in the union. And I'm glad I was wrong on that.
Mm-hmm. I guess my last question would be, I'm going to leave you with this. Are you proud to be an Oklahoman? And if so, why?
That's a tough question. I'm more proud to be the man that I am today than the place where I live or the place that I was born. I was a proud New Yorker for probably all the wrong reasons, but I was. I'm proud of the people in Oklahoma most days. And so in that regard, I guess you could say, yes, I am a proud Oklahoman, because despite the politics here, there is a kindness in Oklahoma. And so in that regard, yeah, I am proud. I'm proud that people will reach across the fence to help someone. And they don't care about party affiliation or religious beliefs. If they see someone in need, there tends to be a helpful heart there. And so, yeah, I think the pride is more in the people than the place. And I guess ultimately that's probably the way it should be.
Man, Scott is just one of those people you could talk to all day, and what a life story. Hopefully, you were able to find a takeaway from his story. But now I want to hand some questions off to you. Do you think it's important to vote, even if you're in a state where your political beliefs may not be in the majority? And what was something we mentioned in our conversation that you didn't know? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Feel free to share this podcast on social media and tag us at The Gay League. Once again, I'm Robin.
And I'm Alex.
and you just listened to the Gailey Podcast.